If you couldn't tell by how I tend to bring it up in my videos whenever possible, I really love Deadlock. The world building, the characters, the vibes, the gameplay, it's just such a great all-around package, and it's not even finished yet. Though, to be fair, Deadlock is also an insane game for crazy people. It combines all of the complexity and mechanics of a MOBA like League of Legends with the gameplay of a hero shooter like Overwatch, while also adding on an entire melee and parry system and a whole suite of platforming movement options like wall jumps and air dashes and whatnot. Like, Deadlock has a lot going on, and yet I've found it to be a lot more approachable than many other MOBAs. I mean, by comparison to all of that, MOBAs like League and Dota suddenly seem a lot more straightforward. Like, at least I don't have to learn platforming mechanics to get around League's map more quickly, and yet I find those games nearly unplayable to learn, whereas I started enjoying Deadlock immediately. And trust me, it's not just because I'm really good at Deadlock or something, because I am assuredly not, yet I still managed to have tons of fun with it. Now, to be fair, I did already talk about why I like Deadlock over other MOBAs in an older video, but today I want to focus more specifically on the design elements in Deadlock that I think make the game so much more approachable even to players that are brand new or even actively hate the MOBA genre as it currently is. Plus, that video I made was back in 2024, right after Deadlock originally, well, I guess released isn't the right word, back when Deadlock was made public, I guess. And, well, the game has gone through a lot of changes and reworks since then that I feel have only made it better and easier to get into. I mean, hell, back when I made that video, Deadlock still had 4 lanes in its map, and honestly, that might be a good place to start. Now, you might be thinking, if Deadlock changed its map from 4 lanes down to just 3, doesn't that just make it just like every other MOBA that also has 3 lanes? Well, the key difference here is that Deadlock has much less defined roles for its characters, and it also has 6 people on each team. See, in League, for example, the way that most games are formatted puts the game in a very specific layout at the start of each match. You have 1 person in the top lane, 1 person in mid, 1 person that roams the jungle, and that leaves only the bottom lane to have 2 people in it. That means that despite being a team-based game, most people end up being forced to play by themselves for the laning phase of each match, which can put a lot of pressure on a brand new player who is still trying to figure out the game. This was the problem that Deadlock had when it had 4 lanes, because it would split up and put 2 people in each of the 2 middle lanes, but then each of the side lanes would only get 1 person each. And I can say from first-hand experience that I have had a couple of friends that bounced off of Deadlock during this phase due to being put into a side lane by themselves where they had to fumble around not really knowing what they were doing because they were still learning the game, and they just didn't have any fun as they got steamrolled by their opponents. So, by having only 3 lanes in the game now, but with 6 players on each team, and no jungler roles or anything like that, now every lane is guaranteed to get 2 people each from each team, which means that there's no more pressure to perform entirely on your own. Every lane is essentially now a 2v2, and that means there's always at least one other person that you can try to fall back to help support you and help you out when you're trying to figure things out. Plus, I think it also opens up more playstyles to be viable without requiring as much coordination with strangers. For example, in League, if you want to play as a support character, well then you basically have to be in the bottom lane, since that's the only lane with multiple people. So if there's already someone that wants to be a support, you basically have to fight over the position amongst yourselves. But in Deadlock, it's easy to get away with playing as a support hero, because you're always guaranteed to have somebody with you that you can focus on buffing and whatnot. It might get a little bit awkward if you have 2 support heroes in the same lane, but at the end of the day, I think it is still overall better for the game. And even though having 3 lanes makes it seem similar to other MOBAs on the surface, it's these different mechanics surrounding that design that make Deadlock a lot simpler and more approachable than its competition. Now, to stay on the topic of laning, there's another aspect to how these lanes are designed that I really like, which are the zipline system that everyone rides along at the start of the game. See, MOBAs at their core are essentially games about territory control. Sure, you can get lots of kills and harass your enemies, but at the end of the day, the team that takes down the enemy towers and destroys their base is the one that wins, even if they get fewer kills throughout the match. As such, getting around that map can be a big factor in your team's ability to defend various points. On top of that, if you return to your base, you get the ability to buy new items, to upgrade your character, and tons of free healing and whatnot. But of course, the downside is the fact that you have to physically travel back to base to do that. So it's this interesting tactical decision of like, when do you find time to abandon your lane so that you can go back to heal and such and hope that nothing goes wrong while you're gone. Now, other MOBAs, again, like League, since I might as well keep using it as an example, they provide some way to usually just teleport back to your base. It'll take some time to cast it, so there's always the risk that someone could find you and interrupt your teleport, but if you can find a safe place to hide and cast it, you can basically pop back home from anywhere on the map, heal up, and then the real cost is the travel time getting back to where you were, rather than the amount of time it took you to leave. Now, this teleport stuff always felt like kind of a weird mechanic in these MOBAs to me. Like, it's fine, it does what it needs to do, but it kind of feels like a band-aid mechanic, whereas I think the zipline system in Deadlock is much more elegant and helpful to new players. So basically, in Deadlock, when you want to travel quickly, the fastest way to do so is via these ziplines, and that comes with a few interesting caveats. For one, the ziplines are only within the lanes on the map, and don't veer off into the concrete jungle. So, if you're off farming camps or fighting people outside of lanes, then you cannot get back to base as quickly, which I think is a very interesting tactical thing to consider. But the other thing I really like is that these ziplines only go out as far as your minions have, and I think that this does a lot to help both convey information in a way that's easy to understand for new players, while also helping naturally prevent them from overextending too much. See, your minions are generally a good barometer for how much territory your team is controlling. By default, minion waves from both teams are literally designed to be at a stalemate in the middle of the map. Things only tip to one side or the other through player intervention, which means that your team is starting to take over more territory, which in turn extends to your zipline. And because the ziplines are all displayed in bright colors on your minimap, it's extremely easy for even a brand new player to get an immediate idea of how much territory your team is currently controlling. With a single glance, you can go, oh, 2 of our lanes are doing well, but the 3rd is clearly being pushed down. We need to go reinforce that. Like, I'm not saying that this info was impossible to deduce in other MOBAs from their minimaps, but I think that the zip lines and their bright colors just make it that much more apparent what's going on at any given moment during a match. As I mentioned earlier, it also acts as a natural deterrent against overextending as well. Your zipline is basically like your safety net. If you see people approaching that you don't think you can handle, then it's probably a good idea to run away, and the fastest way to do so is via your zipline. So even a brand new player will quickly learn that if they keep trying to push and fight far beyond where their zipline has currently got to on the map, then it'll be a lot easier for the opponents to catch you out in the open, and you won't have the ability to run away. Plus, the zipline also has basically the same downside as the teleporting mechanic too, because if someone manages to attack you while you're riding the zipline, well then it'll knock you off and stun you for an agonizingly long time, which often results in your death if they can catch up to you. So even if you aren't overextending, it's still not a get out of jail free card. You still have to make your decision to leave before the enemy gets close enough to actually start engaging with you. So, overall, the zipline system both makes key information about the map state easier to read for new players, while also naturally guiding them to avoid making at least some basic, obvious mistakes about overextending and whatnot. But, of course, we do need to talk about the elephant in the room for almost all MOBAs, the item system. Apart from the lanes on the map, arguably the ability to buy items is the other big identifying mechanic of the MOBA genre that sets it apart from things like hero shooters. But it is also often one of the most obtuse and hardest things to understand and master in these games. Not only does the item shop provide you with a means of making your character stronger, but it does so in a a very free-form way. Technically, any character can purchase any item in the game, which means that you can customize your progression and build towards making your character focus on damage or tankiness or other unique effects that they might have. It's a very core mechanic to this genre, but as such, MOBAs usually have dozens, if not hundreds of items, and that can be incredibly intimidating for new players and make the learning curve of the game feel a lot more like a learning cliff. But I do think that Deadlock has actually done a lot to try and introduce people to the item system in a way that doesn't feel nearly as overwhelming as its competition. And well, I guess I may as well use League again as a direct comparison point. So how about we boot it up and we take a look at what the latest that this experienced MOBA has to offer for its shop menus. Excuse me, but what the hell is this? Like, seriously, I am frankly shocked that even after this game has been out for nearly 2 decades, that League's item menus are still as bad as they are. I mean, just look at these two games side by side for a second and tell me which one looks better and more readable. Like, notice anything missing from League's item menu? Like, oh, I don't know, the names of the items? Like, seriously, this menu is impenetrable. It's just a wall of dozens of different items and icons, and all you get when you look at it is a bunch of pictures you're unfamiliar with and their prices. And like, I guess the prices are nice to see, but it's also like the bare minimum that you would expect from a shop menu. And the icons aren't really that helpful when you don't know what the actual items are yet. If anything, I think that these icons are almost too detailed, like especially when combined with how small they are on screen. All of the colors and artwork from all of these dozens of different items just kind of blends together way too easily at first glance. But even if you can make out what these icons are trying to represent, they still often don't actually convey what they do at all. Like, okay, let's try to be fair, you know? Usually when you see a picture of, like, a sword or a weapon, that means you're getting more damage. If you see something like a suit of armor, then you're getting more defense. You know, at least some of these make sense from first glance, but just as many, if not more of them, feel completely incongruent with the icon that they have. Like, for example, there's an item here that's a really cheap early game item that just has the icon of a shield. So you would think that would also increase your defense like the armor, but instead it gives you a heal? Like, I guess it's still a defensive item, so it's at least in the right ballpark, but already some of these icons are just kind of feeling very arbitrary, and it only gets more obtuse as you get into the higher level and more complicated items, where it's pretty much impossible to convey what they do in a single tiny icon, because they have so many different random specific abilities. I mean, hell, so many of these are literally just different colored swords that it's literally impossible to tell what these things do without just going through each one individually and reading them in full. As such, it's no wonder that new players are almost universally overwhelmed by League's item system. These menus are just straight up terrible, and all that they've done to try and fix this is slap on a few basic band-aid solutions to try and make it a little bit easier to parse. Like, for example, they've added tabs along the top that let you filter by more general class categories like mage, tank, and support, while the categories along the side let you filter by specific qualities like attack damage or lifesteal. So that at least helps you find the kinds of items that you're looking for, but I still don't know what these items actually do at all until I go through and read them. And of course, on top of that, because they clearly know how obtuse this item menu is, when you're brand new to the game just kind of directs you to this different tab where League will literally just tell you what items to buy in much simpler terms, and then just kind of auto-queue items that will work for your character. And like, I guess this gets people into the game faster, but I don't feel like this kind of automation does much to actually teach people how to use the items very well at all. It's all so abstracted away that I feel like it must be very difficult to graduate from this sort of auto-buy system to actually buying and making your own builds yourself. So now that we've established the baseline, suddenly looking at Deadlock's item menus don't feel nearly as intimidating, in my opinion at least. There's still a lot going on here, so I can understand being scared at first, but I really don't think it takes very long for things to start to make sense. For one, the entire item menu is split into just 3 simple tabs: gun, spirit, and health. And something I really love about Deadlock's item system is the investment mechanic. Now, this system can be a bit weird for new players to learn, but even if you don't understand or even know that it exists, I think it still helps new players out a lot. Basically, the way it works is the more souls you invest in a given category, so gun, health, or spirit, the more that you improve that category's stats for your character, regardless of what the actual items you buy are. So, for example, if you invest 4.8 thousand souls into gun items, regardless of what items specifically you buy, then your gun damage will be improved by nearly 50%. Some of the items might give you like additional or conditional damage bonuses on top of that, but you will always get that same baseline damage bonus no matter what items you're buying. So that means that even if you have no idea what you're doing and you're just kind of blindly buying gun items because you're playing a character where you think you want your gun to be better, well, then even if you end up buying items that really don't work with that character, you're still at least getting that baseline support of improving your gun damage with every item you buy. Like I said, there are nuances to this system, but that's all stuff that a brand new player doesn't really need to worry about that much. The point is that, if you want to play a tank, then buying health items will make you tankier. If you want to play a mage or improve a specific ability, then buying spirit items will just make that happen. And this also means that the item shop doesn't need to be flooded with a bunch of items that only do basic things like improving your damage and nothing else. Like, I'm pretty sure there's only one item chain in each category that does nothing but give you better stats for that category. Everything else does, unique effects apart from just improving your basic stats. But beyond the categories, the next thing you'll probably notice is that every item is further divided into up to 4 tiers by its price. So this means that every item of a given tier costs the exact same amount. This helps keep the math really simple in your head, since every tier 1 item costs 800 souls. So it's really easy to remember in the early game that every time you have 800 souls in your wallet, you can cash them in at the shop and get something new. Sure, it feels like a relatively minor feature, but again, when you compare it to something like League, where most items tend to vary in price by seemingly random amounts, it's just that much less that you have to remember, and I think it makes the system easier to learn, especially since each tier also simply costs twice as much as the previous tier, going from 800 to 1600 to 3200, and then finally 6400 at the maximum level. Plus, this also makes it easier to learn the investment system once players are willing to look into it. For example, you get a big stat bonus in every category once you've invested 4,800 souls into that category, which sounds like an arbitrary number, but you can quickly figure out, thanks to the fixed price system, that all you have to do is buy any tier 3 item and any tier 2 item, and you'll have hit that threshold. Or you could buy any 3 different tier 2 items, and once you do that, you'll hit that threshold, and that gives you a really easy sort of system to remember, and in turn, I think makes it that much easier to aim for that kind of goal when you actually start thinking about creating your own builds. Finally, of course, arguably the most important part of this item menu is the fact that it actually has good and descriptive names and icons for the items. Again, compare this to League, where it is simply impossible to parse this menu without having to individually highlight and read about each item's full description. But even if they told us the names in this menu, they seem to be much more focused on providing like world building and lore over actual readability. Sure, having items named things like Tear of the Goddess or the Dark Seal or whatever sounds cool, cool, but it is completely unhelpful to any new players that aren't actually familiar with these items yet, and it makes trying to teach a new player that much more difficult, because if you just tell a newbie to buy something like a glowing moat, well, that doesn't actually tell them at all what that item does unless they actually look it up or you manually explain it to them. Now again, compare this to Deadlock and just look at the items here and what icons they have. I'm willing to bet that even if you have never touched or seen Deadlock before in your life, you can probably guess what nearly all of these items do just from the names and icons alone. Hell, if you want to play a little minigame, why not pause and write down some guesses in the comments for what these tier 1 and tier 2 items do, and then I'll highlight them in the background so you can see how many you get correct. Like, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that an item like, oh, I don't know, extended magazine gives you more bullets in your gun, or that an item like slowing bullets will make it so that you reduce your enemy's move speed when you shoot them. Sure, you might not know what the exact numbers are for those effects, like how much it slows people down or how many extra bullets you get, but at least you get the general idea that if you buy the slowing bullets item, then you're going to be able to slow people when you shoot them. But beyond that, if you do want something similar to what League offers with its item buying guide, Deadlock does have an online build sharing as an in-game feature, so you can literally look up and search through builds made by other players, which in my opinion is already a far cry better than just having the game kind of blindly tell you what to build itself, especially since this means that these guides will all get passively updated by players as the game changes and gets rebalanced without the devs needing to lift a finger. But on top of that, the build sharing system is actually surprisingly fully featured. Like, it's not just a matter of telling you what items you should buy and in what order. Players can organize their items into different categories and label them accordingly so that you can be like, oh, you need these items for the early game, and if you run into trouble, maybe look at this group of items, and then this bunch down here are your capstones, and so on and so forth. Like, that already gives new players so much more clean and organized information to easily understand these builds and what they're looking at. But beyond that, it also allows you to put specific notes on each item itself. So particularly good builds will not only categorize all of the items, but it'll also explain why this item is good on your character and what circumstances you should buy it in and things like that. People can get really in depth with these notes, and just reading through some builds, I think that these can absolutely help a new player learn how a character works and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Like, it's a really good system, and I think that more games like this need to implement it. Though, I mean, to be fair, there's only so much you can learn from reading guides and stuff. That, like, eventually you're going to have to learn some things just through experience, regardless of what tools the game provides for you. There's just a ton of depth and nuance to how these kinds of item mechanics work. You know, most of the items are passives, but then there are active items that you have to use yourself mid-fight, and not to mention that a huge part of the game is about buying counter items to go against specific characters that you might be having trouble with during a match. You know, fighting somebody that does a ton of ability damage, well, then you should buy spirit resistance. Maybe an item to silence them and stop them from using those abilities for a few seconds. Fighting a bullet hose like Haze or Viper, well, then you can buy metal armor to make yourself immune to bullets for a few seconds at least. You know, sure, in the middle of a match, a new player is almost certainly not going to find and utilize these counter items right away, but regardless of whether you're trying to use other people's builds or forge one yourself, I think that because the items are so much better labeled and organized, it isn't hard for someone after a game to go like, okay, so Haze and her bullets were a huge problem for me. What can I do about this? Oh, what's this? There are items called bullet resistance and metal armor, and the icons on those items show bullets bouncing off of you. Maybe those items will help me. And this is where we get into the territory where you really need to start familiarizing yourself with all of the items in order to really master the system. But I think that because it's a lot easier to learn these basics and that the items are so much better presented to the player, I think that players are going to be a lot more willing to get invested and actually start engaging and learning the depth of this system over time. And I think that that's kind of the core idea that Deadlock masters really well compared to a lot of other games. The difference between complexity and depth, because while these concepts are often related, they're definitely not the same thing. Like, you can have a system in a game that is very complex, but doesn't actually mean that the game is going to be strategically deep. For example, if you're making an action game with this huge, varied moveset, you might have a very complicated fighting system on your hands. But then, say it's really, really easy to just stun lock every enemy in the game so hard that you can just combo them to death with basically any moves you want. Well, so you end up with a system that is technically complex with all of these different things that you can do, but the actual strategic depth of the system is very shallow. And in fact, from what I've heard from talking a few people that are more experienced in League of Legends than myself, a lot of people seem to hold the opinion that League's item system is actually kind of brain dead. Like, once you pick a hero, there's usually only a few viable ways to build them, and there's not really much reason to deviate from that build for most matches. Again, I'm just kind of going off of what other people have told me, so feel free to correct me in the comments if you disagree, but it does seem deeply ironic that this item system in games like League can be so complicated and hard for a beginner to understand, while more experienced players seem to feel that it doesn't offer enough depth or variety. It's basically the worst of both worlds. But Deadlock has managed the opposite. Whether you're talking about the items or the zip lines or the laning structure or whatever, a lot of Deadlock's systems individually are a lot more straightforward and simple to learn for at least the basics, but they all still have a ton of depth to pick up on over time. The third-person perspective makes for a more familiar set of controls for people that play shooters or platformers, but the dashing and wall jumping adds depth to that movement system. The zip lines make it easier to follow what's going on in each lane and get around the map, while still having its own unique downsides to contend with and strategize around. The items are labeled and organized in a way that's far easier to understand, while still being extremely impactful and having a lot of strategic variety to the kinds of items that you can build for each character. Finally, one last thing that I want to bring up here at the end is that Deadlock has a new game mode called Street Brawl. This was released alongside the latest patch of Heroes in a recent big update, and I gotta say, I think the addition of Street Brawl is incredibly smart on Valve's part. In short, Street Brawl is basically just an alternate mode that throws out almost all of the actual MOBA mechanics and focuses a lot more on the hero shooter side of things and getting you into big chaotic team fights as soon as possible. It cuts the player count down from 6v6 to only 4v4, but it puts everyone in the same lane, and then you just kind of start fighting each other, and the first team to take down the enemy's guardian wins that round, with each match being a best 3 out of 5 rounds. So the big thing here is that there's no more worrying about things like gathering resources or grinding camps or feeding the enemy if you're doing poorly or anything like that. In fact, the item system is replaced entirely with this pseudo-random roulette where the game just kind of gives you a choice of 3 items to pick from at a time, and you just kind of gotta work with whatever the game gives you. So it's very much also a more casual and chaotic game mode as well. But I think that this is really smart because it basically turns the game into a straightforward hero shooter, or at least a lot more of one. If you're a new player and you don't know what kind of hero you want to play yet, well, Street Brawl is an excellent way to try out new characters. You don't need to worry about making a build or learning the map at the same time or anything like that, because you just kind of got to work with what the game gives you anyways. But I also like that the objective of each round is still to actually destroy your enemy's guardian, not just to get the most kills like a team deathmatch or something, because it helps reinforce that ultimately objectives are what matter over kills. Plus, it lets you try out the more powerful versions of these characters in a much quicker format. You start out round 1 with 6 points to put in all of your abilities, and by round 3, the minimum that every match will reach no matter what, you can easily have maxed out 1 or 2 of your abilities entirely, or put 2 points into all of them. So you basically get to experience what it's like to get into a team fight at like the 30 or 40 minute mark of a normal game, but in less than 10 minutes of a Street Brawl. So it's also just good for practicing late game fighting, even if you are an experienced player. And the overall match times are just really, really short. A long game of Street Brawl might last for like up to 15 minutes, if that, but most games I've played come in at less than 10, which is a blink in the eye compared to the like 30 or 40-minute games that normal Deadlock provides. And I think that this makes this game mode a lot more approachable for new players as quick bursts of fun when you might not have the time to dedicate to multiple hours of Deadlock. I mean, the game even recommends that you load up Street Brawl first when you finish the tutorial, and I think that that's a really smart move, especially for anyone coming from more of a hero shooter background than a MOBA one. But, as always, I'm happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. By all means, let me know if there are any other parts of Deadlock that you think can help people get hooked on this game. Or hell, even what parts you think are sticking points that might have turned you or your friends off from it. It is easy to forget sometimes that this game is still in alpha, so if we can provide feedback for what parts of the game are still kind of hard to learn, well then, the game is only going to get better from here with that feedback. But for now, if you like the video, make sure to give me a like and hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content like this in the future. If you want to support the channel more directly, there is a link to my Ko-Fi in the description down below. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope to see you all in the next one.